There's a sound that terrifies most people. It's not the sound of failure, it's not the sound of criticism or rejection. It's something far more unsettling. It's the sound of nothing. Silence. The absence of noise, distraction, entertainment, validation. That space where you're alone with your thoughts, with your fears, with the parts of yourself you've been running from. And here's what Marcus Aurelius discovered 2,000 years ago. Something that still holds true today. The silence you avoid is exactly where your strength is reborn. We live in the loudest era in human history. Music in your ears, notifications on your screen, voices in your feed, noise everywhere all the time, drowning out the one voice that actually matters, your own. And the tragedy is, most people have become so addicted to the noise that they've forgotten how to be still. They've forgotten how to sit with themselves. They've forgotten that real power doesn't come from constant stimulation. It comes from the depths of silence. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in Rome, knew this intimately. He could have filled every moment with entertainment, with advisors, with distraction. But instead he chose something different. He chose solitude. He chose silence. Because he understood that the noise of the world will drown out your soul if you let it. And in that silence, in that uncomfortable, raw, unfiltered space, he found clarity. He found strength. He found himself. Today we're going to explore why you're avoiding silence, what you're really running from, and why the very thing you fear most is the doorway to the strength, the peace, and the freedom you've been searching for everywhere else. This isn't comfortable. It's not easy. But it's true. And if you're ready to stop running and start becoming who you were meant to be, then stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change everything. Before we go deeper into this journey, if this message resonates with something inside you, if you're ready to face the silence and discover what's waiting there, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Leave a like to support this work. Comment below with one thing you've been avoiding in your own silence, and share this with someone who needs to hear it, because this isn't just philosophy. This is transformation. This is truth. Now let's begin. When was the last time you sat in complete silence? No music, no podcast, no scrolling, no television in the background, just you and the quiet. If you're honest, you probably can't remember. And if you try to do it right now, within 60 seconds, you'll feel the urge to reach for something. Anything. To fill the void. To escape the discomfort. Because silence has become terrifying. But it wasn't always this way. For most of human history, silence was natural. It was part of life. People spent hours, days even, with nothing but their thoughts and the sounds of nature. And in that silence, they discovered things. About themselves. About meaning. About what truly mattered. But somewhere along the way, we lost that. We replaced contemplation with consumption. We replaced depth with distraction. We replaced inner work with outer noise. And now we're suffering for it. Anxiety is at an all-time high. Depression is everywhere. People feel lost, disconnected, empty. And they keep looking for answers in the noise. More content, more connections, more stimulation. But the answer isn't in the noise. It's in the silence they're avoiding. Let me tell you what's really happening when you avoid silence. You're not just avoiding boredom. You're avoiding yourself. You're avoiding the thoughts you don't want to think, the feelings you don't want to feel, the truths you don't want to face, the regrets, the shame, the grief, the loneliness, the questions about whether you're living the life you actually want or just the life you've been conditioned to accept. Silence forces you to confront all of this, and that's why it's terrifying. Because in the noise, you can pretend. You can distract yourself from the ache inside. You can convince yourself that you're fine, that you're busy, that you're living. But in the silence, the masks fall away. The pretense dissolves. And you're left with the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are and what you're feeling. And most people would rather do anything than face that. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He was a man who carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders. He had access to every pleasure, every distraction, every form of entertainment Rome could offer. But he chose to withdraw into silence, regularly, deliberately, because he knew that without silence he would lose himself. He would become a puppet of external forces reactive to every crisis, every opinion, every demand. But in silence, he could reclaim his center. He could think clearly. He could remember his principles. He could separate what mattered from what didn't. In his private writings, which we now know as meditations, he constantly reminded himself to retreat inward. He wrote, "People look for retreats for themselves in the country, by the coast, or in the hills. There is nowhere that a person can find a more peaceful and trouble-free retreat than in his own mind." This wasn't poetic language. This was survival. This was his practice. Because he knew that the external world was chaos. But the internal world, when cultivated in silence, could be a sanctuary. Now let's talk about what happens psychologically when you avoid silence. Your nervous system never gets to reset. You're constantly in a state of stimulation, which keeps your body in a low-grade stress response. Your mind never gets to process. Thoughts, emotions, experiences pile up without being integrated. You become reactive rather than reflective. You lose touch with your intuition, your values, your authentic desires. You start living on autopilot, responding to whatever's in front of you rather than consciously choosing your path. And here's the cruel irony. The more you avoid silence, the louder your inner chaos becomes. The thoughts you're running from don't disappear. They multiply. They grow stronger. They start showing up as anxiety, as insomnia, as irritability, as that constant feeling that something is wrong but you can't quite name what it is. Because you've been too busy running to actually stop and listen. There's a reason why every wisdom tradition throughout history has emphasized silence. Meditation, contemplation, prayer, solitude. Not because these practices are inherently spiritual, but because they're inherently necessary. They're how you maintain your humanity in a world that's constantly trying to colonize your attention. They're how you stay connected to yourself when everything is pulling you outward. But we've been conditioned to believe that silence is wasted time, that if you're not producing, consuming, or connecting, you're falling behind. That stillness is laziness. That contemplation is indulgence. And this conditioning is destroying us, because we've forgotten that all action flows from being, that all doing comes from knowing, that all external achievement is meaningless if you've lost yourself in the process of attaining it. Think about the people in your life who seem genuinely at peace, who seem centered, grounded, unshakable. I can almost guarantee you they have a practice of silence, whether they call it meditation, prayer, journaling, or just sitting quietly with their morning coffee. They've learned to be with themselves. They've learned that silence isn't empty. It's full of wisdom, full of clarity, full of the strength that only comes from going inward. Marcus Aurelius faced unimaginable challenges: war, plague, political betrayal, the death of loved ones. And yet, he remained steady. Not because he was superhuman, but because he had built an inner fortress through the practice of silence. When chaos erupted around him, he could retreat within. He could access a place of calm, of perspective, of wisdom. And from that place, he could respond rather than react. He could lead rather than be led. He could maintain his integrity rather than be corrupted by circumstance. But here's what most people don't realize. That fortress isn't built in a day. It's built in the accumulation of quiet moments, moments where you choose silence over scrolling, stillness over stimulation, reflection over distraction. Each time you make that choice, you're laying another brick. You're strengthening the foundation. You're preparing yourself for the storms that will inevitably come. And the storms will come. Life guarantees it. Loss, failure, disappointment, heartbreak. And when they do, the question is, will you have built the inner strength to weather them? Or will you crumble because you never did the work in silence? Because you never faced yourself? Because you never developed the capacity to be alone with your thoughts without falling apart? The silence you avoid is not your enemy. It's your teacher. It's the space where you meet yourself fully and honestly, where you process what you're carrying, where you let go of what no longer serves you, where you remember who you are beneath all the roles, expectations, and identities you've accumulated. It's where your strength is not created but discovered, because it was always there, waiting, hidden beneath the noise. Imagine your consciousness as a well. At the surface, the water is agitated, disturbed by every breeze, every thrown stone, every passing shadow. This is your everyday mind, reactive, distracted, constantly moving, never still. But if you go deeper, below the surface turbulence, there's a depth where the water is perfectly calm, perfectly clear. This is the place Marcus Aurelius was trying to reach. This is the place that can only be accessed through silence. But here's the problem. Most people never go below the surface. They spend their entire lives at the level of agitation, thinking that the chaos they experience is all there is. They identify with the ripples, the disturbances, the constant movement. And because they never dive deeper, they never discover the calm that exists below. They never access their true strength. In psychology, we understand this as the difference between the reactive mind and the observing mind. The reactive mind is constantly responding to stimuli. It's the part of you that gets triggered, that feels urgency, that responds automatically to whatever's happening around you. It operates on pattern, on conditioning, on survival instinct. And when you're caught in the noise of life, this is the only mind you have access to. But the observing mind, the witness consciousness, exists at a deeper level. It's the part of you that can watch your thoughts without being consumed by them, that can feel emotions without being controlled by them, that can observe patterns without being trapped by them. This is the mind Marcus Aurelius cultivated, and it's only accessible in silence. The reason silence is so powerful is because it interrupts the reactive patterns. When you remove external stimulation, your mind has nothing new to react to. And at first it panics. It reaches for familiar loops, old worries, repetitive thoughts, unresolved emotions. This is why the first few minutes of silence feel so uncomfortable. Your mind is trying to keep you at the surface level, where it feels safe, where it knows how to operate. But if you stay with the discomfort, something shifts. The surface agitation begins to settle. And slowly, gradually, you start to descend. You drop below the reactive layer into something deeper, into presence, into awareness, into the part of you that's been watching all along but has been drowned out by the noise. Marcus Aurelius practiced this descent daily. He would sit with himself, often writing, not to communicate with others, but to communicate with this deeper self. He was essentially diving into the well, exploring the depths, accessing the wisdom that could only be found in stillness. And what he discovered there transformed him. He found clarity about what mattered and what didn't. He found acceptance of things he couldn't control. He found strength that wasn't dependent on external circumstances. Now let's talk about what happens to your brain in silence. Neuroscience shows us that when you remove external stimulation and enter a state of quiet contemplation, your brain shifts from beta waves, which are associated with active thinking and problem solving, to alpha and theta waves, which are associated with relaxation, creativity, and access to the subconscious mind. This is where insight happens. This is where healing happens. This is where integration happens. But most people never give their brain the chance to make this shift. They keep it locked in beta wave activity all day long, thinking, planning, worrying, responding. And then they wonder why they feel exhausted, why they can't think clearly, why they feel disconnected from themselves. It's because they've never allowed their mind to rest. They've never allowed themselves to descend into the depths. There's another layer to this that's even more profound. In silence, you begin to hear what Carl Jung called the voice of the self, the capital S self, which is different from your ego. Your ego is the constructed identity you've built based on your experiences, your conditioning, your wounds, your achievements. It's the part of you that's always concerned with how you're perceived, with maintaining control, with avoiding pain. But the self, the deeper you, exists beyond all of that. It's the essence of who you are beneath the layers of conditioning. It's wise. It's compassionate. It's connected to something larger than your individual concerns. And it speaks in whispers, quiet nudges, subtle knowing. But you'll never hear it if you're drowning in noise. You'll never access it if you're always at the surface level. Marcus Aurelius was in constant dialogue with this deeper self. His writings are essentially a record of that conversation. He would ask himself profound questions. What is within my control? What is the right action here? What would the highest version of myself do? And in the silence, answers would come. Not always immediately, not always comfortably, but they would come. Because silence creates the space for wisdom to emerge. Let's address the fear directly. Why do people avoid going into the depths? Because they're afraid of what they'll find there. They're afraid they'll encounter pain they've been suppressing, grief they haven't processed, shame they haven't forgiven, truths they haven't accepted, and they're right. You will encounter these things. The descent into silence is not all peace and light. It's shadow work. It's facing what you've been avoiding. But here's what Marcus Aurelius understood. Avoiding these things doesn't make them go away. It just keeps them buried where they continue to influence your behavior, your choices, your relationships, your sense of self. They become the undercurrents that control you without your awareness. But when you face them in silence, when you bring them into conscious awareness, you take back your power. You integrate them. You transform them. Think of it this way. Every unprocessed emotion, every unacknowledged fear, every suppressed truth is like a weight tied to you. And you've been swimming through life carrying all these weights, wondering why everything feels so heavy, why you're so tired. Silence is the place where you can finally set them down, where you can examine them, where you can decide which ones you actually need to carry, and which ones you've been holding on to out of habit or fear. This is why Marcus wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." Not because the past and future don't matter, but because in silence, in presence, you have access to your full power. You're not fragmented across time, replaying old wounds or rehearsing future anxieties. You're here, whole, aware. And from this place, you can actually address what needs to be addressed. You can heal what needs to be healed. You can grow in ways that are impossible when you're caught in the noise. The metaphor of the well is also about depth. Most people live shallow lives not because they're shallow people, but because they never go deep. They skim the surface of experiences, relationships, knowledge. They consume without digesting. They react without reflecting. They move from one thing to the next without ever sitting with anything long enough to truly understand it. But depth is where richness lives. Depth is where meaning is made. And you cannot access depth without silence, without the willingness to sit with something, to contemplate it, to let it reveal itself to you slowly. This is how wisdom is cultivated, not through accumulation of information, but through deep understanding that comes from sustained attention. Marcus Aurelius didn't have access to the internet, to endless books, to constant input. And perhaps that was his advantage, because with limited external input, he was forced to go deep with what he had. He chewed on ideas. He wrestled with concepts. He applied philosophy to his actual life rather than just consuming it as entertainment. And that depth made him who he was. So the question becomes, are you willing to dive? Are you willing to leave the agitated surface and descend into the depths? Are you willing to face what's waiting there? Because that's where your strength is. That's where your wisdom is. That's where your true self is. Not at the surface, reacting to every wave, but deep below, where the water is still, clear, and infinitely powerful. Transformation doesn't happen in the noise. It happens in the silence. Not because silence is magical, but because silence is where you finally have the space to change, to rewire, to become someone different than who you've been. And this is both the promise and the terror of silence. Because to transform means to let go of old versions of yourself. And that's a kind of death. Marcus Aurelius understood this. He wrote extensively about impermanence, about the necessity of letting things go, about the practice of dying before you die. Not in a morbid sense, but in a liberating one. Because when you're willing to let the old you die in silence, you create space for a new you to be born. And that new you is not constructed. It's revealed. It's who you've always been beneath the conditioning, the wounds, the false identities. So let's talk about how you actually practice silence, how you actually do this work. Because it's one thing to philosophize about it, and another thing entirely to sit down and face it. And I want to give you a realistic, practical approach that honors both the ancient wisdom and the modern challenges you face. First, start small. You cannot go from constant noise to extended silence overnight. Your nervous system will rebel. Your mind will panic. You need to build capacity gradually. Start with 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes a day where you sit in complete silence. No phone, no music, no distractions. Just you and your breath and whatever arises. And here's what will happen. Your mind will immediately try to convince you this is pointless. It will throw thoughts at you, worries, to-do lists, judgments. This is normal. This is the surface agitation we talked about. Don't fight it. Don't try to empty your mind. That's not the goal. The goal is to observe, to witness these thoughts without getting pulled into them, to practice being the watcher rather than the watched. Marcus Aurelius would do this through writing. He would sit in silence and write his observations. Not profound philosophy at first, but simple reminders. Observations about his reactions, his patterns, his struggles. This practice of externalizing your internal experience is powerful because it creates separation. You begin to see that you are not your thoughts. You are the one observing and recording them. You can do this too. Keep a journal for your silence practice. Not a gratitude journal or a productivity journal, but a consciousness journal. Write down what you notice when you sit in silence. What thoughts dominate? What emotions arise? What patterns keep repeating? Don't analyze or judge, just observe and record. This alone will begin to change you. The second practice is what I call sacred boredom. Deliberately create moments of boredom throughout your day. Wait in line without checking your phone. Sit in your car for a few minutes before going inside. Eat a meal without any entertainment. These micro moments of silence are training. They're teaching your nervous system that you're safe without constant stimulation. They're building your capacity to be with yourself. Because here's what most people don't realize. The discomfort you feel in silence isn't actually coming from the silence itself. It's coming from your nervous system's addiction to stimulation. You've trained yourself to need constant input. And like any addiction, when you withdraw, there's discomfort. But if you stay with it, if you don't immediately reach for the fix, your nervous system recalibrates. It learns that it's okay to be unstimulated. And that's freedom. The third practice is contemplative walking. Marcus Aurelius would walk alone, often at dawn or dusk, using the rhythm of walking as a form of moving meditation. You can do this too. Walk without headphones, without a destination. Just walk and notice. Notice your breath. Notice your surroundings. Notice your thoughts arising and passing. This is silence in motion. And for many people, it's easier than sitting still. The fourth practice, and perhaps the most challenging, is facing the shadow in silence. This is where the real transformation happens. Because eventually, if you practice silence consistently, you will encounter the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. The shame, the anger, the grief, the fear. And this is the moment most people quit. They retreat back into the noise because it feels too heavy, too dark, too much. But Marcus Aurelius would tell you, this is exactly where you need to be. This is the fire that forges strength. When you sit with difficult emotions in silence without trying to fix them or escape them or understand them, something alchemical happens. The emotion moves through you. It transforms. It loses its power over you. Not because you've defeated it, but because you've integrated it. Here's how to do this. When a difficult emotion arises in silence, place your hand on your heart. Breathe into it. Say to yourself, this is suffering. This is part of being human. May I be kind to myself in this moment. This is not weakness. This is courage. This is what Marcus practiced, though he might have used different words. This is self-compassion in the face of shadow. And then stay. Don't run. Don't distract. Just stay with the feeling. Let it be as intense as it needs to be. And notice that it doesn't actually destroy you. It rises. It peaks. It passes. Like a wave. And on the other side of it, there's space. There's peace. There's strength. The strength that comes from knowing you can handle your own inner weather. The fifth practice is the evening examination. Marcus did this religiously. Before sleep, he would review his day in silence, not to judge himself harshly, but to learn. Where did I act according to my principles? Where did I lose myself? Where did I react instead of respond? What would I do differently tomorrow? This practice creates a feedback loop. You're not just living unconsciously, you're actively learning from your life. You can adapt this. Spend 10 minutes before bed in silence reviewing your day. But here's the key. Do it with the compassion of a wise elder, not the judgment of a harsh critic. You're not looking for reasons to feel bad about yourself. You're looking for patterns to understand, lessons to integrate, opportunities to grow. This is how transformation becomes conscious rather than accidental. Now let's address the resistance, because as you begin to practice silence, you will face resistance. Strong resistance. Your mind will tell you this is a waste of time, that you have too much to do. That silence is for monks and mystics, not for people with real lives and real responsibilities. This voice is not the truth. This voice is the ego protecting itself. Because silence threatens the ego's dominance. The ego thrives in noise. It feeds on comparison, achievement, drama, distraction. But in silence, the ego has nothing to work with. It becomes transparent. You begin to see it for what it is. A useful tool, but not your identity. And this terrifies the ego, so it will fight back. It will create urgency. It will manufacture crisis. It will do anything to pull you back into the noise. But here's what Marcus Aurelius knew. You don't have to fight the ego. You just have to observe it. When you notice the resistance, when you hear that voice telling you to skip your silence practice, pause. Recognize it. Say to yourself, there's the ego trying to protect itself. And then gently, compassionately, choose silence anyway. Not as a battle, but as a choice. A choice to honor something deeper. And slowly, over time, something miraculous happens. The resistance decreases. Silence stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like a refuge. You begin to crave it, to need it, not as an escape from life, but as a foundation for life. Because you've discovered what Marcus discovered, that everything good in your life flows from that place of inner stillness. Your clarity, your creativity, your compassion, your courage, your wisdom, all of it emerges from the silent depths. This is the transformation, not becoming someone new, but remembering who you've always been, beneath the noise, beneath the conditioning, beneath the roles and identities and protective layers. In silence, you meet yourself, your true self. And from that meeting, everything changes. There are teachings about silence in Marcus Aurelius's writings that are easy to miss because they're not explicit. He doesn't have a chapter titled On Silence. But woven throughout his meditations is a profound understanding of why withdrawal, stillness, and inner retreat are not optional luxuries, but essential practices. And these hidden lessons are perhaps more relevant now than ever. The first hidden lesson is this: silence is not about escaping the world. It's about seeing the world clearly. Marcus wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Notice what he's saying. The retreat is not geographical. It's not about running away to a monastery or a mountain. It's about turning inward while remaining engaged with life. This is the paradox that most people miss. They think silence means checking out, becoming passive, avoiding responsibility. But for Marcus, silence was what enabled him to be more engaged, more effective, more present. Because when you retreat into silence regularly, You clean the lens through which you see reality. You remove the distortions of reactivity, emotion, assumption, and then, when you return to action, you act from clarity rather than confusion. Think about how much of your life is spent acting from a distorted lens. You make decisions based on fear. You react based on old wounds. You perceive threats that don't exist. You miss opportunities because you're too caught up in mental noise to see them. But when you practice silence, you calibrate. You return to accuracy. You see things as they are, not as your conditioning tells you they should be. The second hidden lesson is about sovereignty. Marcus was obsessed with the concept of ruling oneself. He understood that external power meant nothing if he didn't have internal mastery. And internal mastery requires silence. Because in silence, you discover what's truly yours and what you've borrowed. What are your actual values versus what you've been told to value? What are your real desires versus what you've been conditioned to want? Most people never ask these questions. They live according to scripts written by their family, their culture, their trauma, their peers. They think they're making choices, but they're actually following patterns. And they'll never know the difference until they sit in silence long enough to hear their own voice beneath all the others. Until they can distinguish between the voice of conditioning and the voice of truth. Marcus practiced this constantly. He would question his own motivations, his own reactions, his own judgments, not to indulge in endless self-analysis, but to ensure he was acting from his center, not from external pressure or internal compulsion. This is what sovereignty looks like. Not power over others, but power over yourself. And that power is forged in silence. The third hidden lesson is about death as a teacher. Marcus meditated on death not morbidly but practically. He knew his time was limited. He knew that everything he had could be taken away, and this awareness, contemplated in silence, changed how he lived. It made him more present, more grateful, more focused on what actually mattered, less willing to waste time on petty concerns or false pursuits. In silence, you too can practice this. You can contemplate the reality that this life is temporary, that the people you love will not be here forever, that your time is finite. And instead of this being depressing, it becomes clarifying. It becomes liberating. Because when you truly accept impermanence, you stop postponing life. You stop taking things for granted. You start living with intention, with presence, with love. Marcus would ask himself, what if this were my last day? Not to create anxiety, but to create focus. In silence, you can ask yourself the same question. What would change if you knew you only had a month left? What would suddenly not matter? What would become urgent? This contemplation reveals your priorities with brutal clarity, and then you have a choice. Keep living as if you have forever, or start aligning your life with what actually matters. The fourth hidden lesson is about the inner citadel, a concept Marcus returned to again and again. He imagined his mind as a fortress that could never be breached from outside, only surrendered from within. And silence was how he maintained that fortress, how he reinforced the walls, how he trained the guards, how he kept the citadel impregnable. What he understood is that the world will always try to invade your mind, with demands, with opinions, with seductions, with fears. And if you're constantly exposed, constantly open, constantly reactive, these invasions succeed. You lose your center. You become colonized by external forces. But if you retreat into silence regularly, you create boundaries. You remember who you are. You reinforce your values. You make yourself unconquerable. This is not about becoming closed off or cold. It's about having a place to return to that's entirely yours. A place where the noise of the world cannot reach. A place where you can restore your clarity, your purpose, your sense of self. And from that place, you can engage with the world powerfully, but not desperately. You can give, but not be drained. You can love, but not be consumed. The fifth hidden lesson is about the practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Marcus would sit in silence and imagine worst-case scenarios. not to torture himself, but to prepare himself, to rob future adversity of its power to shock and destabilize him. He would imagine losing everything, facing ultimate challenges, enduring unthinkable pain. And in doing so, he built psychological immunity. You can practice this too. In silence. Imagine what you fear most. Really imagine it. Let yourself feel the fear fully. And then ask, would I survive this? Could I find meaning even in this? Is there a version of me that could handle this with dignity? The answer is almost always yes. And once you've faced your fears in silence, once you've rehearsed resilience, the actual challenges of life become more manageable. Not because they're less difficult, but because you're more prepared. Marcus also practiced what we might call gratitude of absence. In silence, he would imagine life without the things he valued, without his health, without his loved ones, without his position. And this practice made him appreciate what he had while he had it. It prevented him from taking things for granted. It made ordinary moments precious. This is profound, because most people only appreciate things after they're gone. They only realize what they had when it's too late. But in silence, you can practice losing things before you lose them. And paradoxically, this makes you hold them more lightly and love them more deeply. You cherish without clinging. You enjoy without fearing loss, because you've already faced the loss in your mind and survived it. The final hidden lesson is this: silence reveals what's essential. Marcus constantly distinguished between what was necessary and what was extra, what was within his control and what wasn't, what aligned with nature and what went against it. And he could only make these distinctions in silence, because in noise everything feels urgent, everything feels important, everything feels necessary. But in silence, the non-essential falls away. You see clearly what's actually important. And this clarity allows you to simplify, to focus, to direct your energy toward what matters rather than dispersing it across 1,000 meaningless pursuits. This is how Marcus managed to rule an empire and still maintain his soul. He knew what was essential, and he protected that with fierce commitment, letting everything else go. These hidden lessons are not abstract philosophy. They're practical wisdom forged in the silence of a man who faced everything life could throw at him and remained unbroken. And they're available to you, in your own silence, in your own inner citadel, waiting to be discovered, not learned but remembered. Now we come to the most important part. Because all the philosophy in the world means nothing if you don't apply it, if you don't take these ancient insights and make them real in your actual life. So let's talk about how you integrate silence into a modern existence that seems designed to prevent it. How do you practice what Marcus practiced when you're drowning in notifications, obligations, and noise? The first practical step is to create non-negotiable silence anchors in your day. These are brief moments of silence that happen no matter what. For most people, the best anchors are first thing in the morning and last thing at night. Even just 3 minutes. 3 minutes of silence before you pick up your phone in the morning. 3 minutes of silence after you turn off the lights at night. These bookends to your day create stability. They remind you who you are before the world starts making demands and after those demands have ceased. Marcus would wake before dawn and spend time in contemplation. You don't need to be that extreme. But you do need to claim some time for silence before the day claims you. Because here's what happens if you don't. You wake up and immediately enter reactive mode. Messages, problems, other people's agendas. And you never recover. You spend the entire day responding instead of directing, reacting instead of creating, being pulled instead of choosing. But if you start with silence even briefly, you set a different tone. You remember your intentions. You ground yourself in your values. You access the deeper part of yourself that knows what actually matters. And from that place you move through your day differently, more consciously, more powerfully, less like a leaf blown by wind, and more like a tree rooted in earth. The second practical step is to turn dead time into silence time. You have more opportunities for silence than you think. The commute, the wait, the transition. Most people fill these moments with podcasts, music, or scrolling. And there's nothing wrong with content in moderation. But what if you reclaimed some of these moments for silence? What if your morning commute became a moving meditation instead of another input session? This doesn't mean you can never listen to anything. It means you're intentional about when you choose noise and when you choose silence. Because every choice is training. You're either training yourself to need constant stimulation or training yourself to be comfortable without it. And that training determines the quality of your inner life. The third practical step is the weekly silence retreat. Marcus would regularly withdraw from his duties for extended contemplation. You probably can't disappear for days, but you can claim a few hours. Once a week, create a mini retreat. Turn off your phone. Go somewhere you can be alone. Walk in nature. Sit in a quiet room. Journal. Just be. No agenda. No productivity. Just presence. This practice is revolutionary because it creates space for deeper processing. The daily silence anchors maintain you. But the weekly retreat transforms you. It's where you can really descend into the depths, where you can face what you've been carrying, where you can let go of what you no longer need, where you can reconnect with your essence beneath all the roles and responsibilities. The fourth practical step is conscious media consumption. Most people consume content unconsciously. They scroll without intention. They watch without choosing. They fill every quiet moment with input. And this habit is killing their capacity for silence, for original thought, for deep feeling. So start auditing what you consume and why. Ask yourself before consuming anything, is this adding value to my life? Or am I just avoiding silence? Am I choosing this consciously? Or am I reaching for it compulsively? This simple question will reveal patterns you didn't know you had. And once you see the patterns, you can change them. You can choose to consume less and contemplate more, to input less and integrate more, to be entertained less and be present more. The fifth practical step is conversational silence. Most people are uncomfortable with silence in conversation. They fill every pause with words. But there's profound power in letting silence exist between words, in taking time to think before speaking, in creating space for others to think before responding. Marcus was known for this. He would pause. Consider. Respond thoughtfully rather than immediately. Practice this. When someone asks you a question, pause. Let there be 3 seconds of silence before you answer. When you're about to speak, pause. Ask yourself, is this necessary? Is this true? Is this kind? This practice will transform your relationships and your communication, because you'll stop reacting verbally and start responding consciously. You'll say less and mean more. You'll create space for real connection instead of just filling air with noise. The sixth practical step is befriending boredom. We've demonized boredom in modern culture. We've turned it into an emergency that must be immediately fixed with entertainment or distraction. But boredom is actually the doorway to creativity, to insight, to original thought. Marcus knew this. He embraced boredom. He sat with it. He let his mind wander in undirected ways. And that's when his deepest insights came. So when you feel bored, resist the urge to immediately reach for stimulation. Sit with it. Notice what happens. You'll be uncomfortable at first, but stay. Let your mind wander. Let it make unexpected connections. Let it get curious. This is how creativity works. This is how insight emerges. But only if you give it space. Only if you're willing to be bored long enough for something interesting to arise from within rather than from outside. The seventh practical step is creating a physical space for silence. Even if it's just a corner of a room, designate a space that's dedicated to silence. No technology, no clutter, just simplicity. When you enter this space, you enter silence. Your nervous system will learn this association, and over time, just being in that space will help you access stillness more quickly. Marcus had his tent, his writing space, places where he could retreat from the demands of empire. You need this too. Not a palace, just a corner, a chair, a cushion, a place that's yours, where the world doesn't reach, where you can be with yourself fully. The eighth and final practical step is accountability and community. This might seem contradictory since silence is a solitary practice. But having others who value silence can support your practice. Share your commitment with someone you trust. Check in weekly about your silence practice. This isn't about proving anything. It's about creating structure and support for a practice that goes against everything your culture is telling you to do. Or find a community, even if it's online, of people committed to contemplative practice. Read Marcus Aurelius together. Share insights. Encourage each other. Because this path is countercultural. And when you're going against the current, it helps to have companions who understand why you're doing it. Here's what all of this comes down to. You have to decide that silence is not optional, that it's not something you'll get to when life calms down or when you have more time, because life will never calm down. You will never have more time. The noise will always be there, ready to consume you. The only question is whether you're going to let it. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth and still made time for silence. What's your excuse? I ask this not to shame you, but to wake you up. Because you have time, you just haven't prioritized it. You've let other things, less important things, take precedence, and your inner life is suffering for it. But it doesn't have to be this way. Starting today, starting right now, you can choose silence. You can claim it. You can protect it. You can let it be the foundation on which everything else in your life rests. And when you do, everything changes. Not all at once, but gradually, deeply, permanently. Your strength is not in the noise, it's in the silence you've been avoiding. And it's waiting for you. All you have to do is stop running and turn toward it. So here we are, at the end of this exploration, but also at the beginning. Because now you know. You know what you've been avoiding. You know what's waiting for you in the silence. You know that the discomfort you feel when everything gets quiet is not a problem to be solved, but a doorway to be entered. You know that your strength, your clarity, your wisdom, your true self, all of it lives in the depths that can only be reached through silence. And now you have a choice. You can take this knowledge and do nothing with it. You can go back to the noise, back to the distraction, back to the endless consumption that numbs you and keeps you surface level. No one will judge you for it. Most people make that choice every single day. Or you can do what Marcus Aurelius did. You can choose the harder path, the path of discipline, the path of inner work, the path of silence. Not because it's easy, not because it feels good at first, but because it leads to the life you actually want. The life where you're not controlled by your reactions, where you're not at the mercy of external circumstances, where you're grounded in something deep and unshakable. This is not about becoming perfect. Marcus Aurelius wasn't perfect. He struggled. He doubted. He faced his own darkness. But he kept returning to the silence. He kept doing the work. And that consistency transformed him from a man born into power into a man who earned wisdom. From someone who ruled others into someone who ruled himself. You have that same opportunity. Every single day. Every moment you choose silence over noise, stillness over stimulation, depth over distraction, you're making a deposit into your inner fortress. You're strengthening the foundation. You're becoming someone who cannot be shaken by the chaos of the world because you've found the calm within. And here's the beautiful truth. You don't have to wait to feel the benefits. They start immediately. The first time you sit in silence and survive the discomfort, you've proven something to yourself. You've proven you're stronger than your impulses. You've proven you can be with yourself. You've proven you don't need constant external validation or stimulation to be okay. And that proof changes everything. So I'm asking you, not as a teacher to a student, but as one human being to another who's also walking this path. Will you choose silence? Will you face what you've been avoiding? Will you discover the strength that's been waiting for you all along in the depths of your own being? Because the world needs people who are grounded, who are clear, who cannot be manipulated by noise, who have done the inner work and emerged with wisdom. The world needs you, not the reactive, scattered, surface-level version of you, but the deep, centered, powerful version that only silence can reveal. Your strength is reborn in the silence you avoid. This is not metaphor. This is truth, and now you know it. Thank you for taking this journey with me. for being willing to explore these uncomfortable truths, for considering that maybe, just maybe, the answer you've been searching for everywhere else has been waiting inside you all along. If this resonated with something deep in you, subscribe to this channel. Share this with someone who's ready to hear it. Leave a comment telling me, what will your first step into silence be? Not what you think you should do, but what you're actually going to do. Today. Right now. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations never intending anyone else to read them. They were his private practice, his conversation with himself in silence. And yet 2,000 years later, they're still changing lives. Because truth doesn't age, wisdom doesn't expire, and the practice of turning inward, of finding strength in silence, of building an inner fortress, this is as relevant now as it was then. Your fortress is waiting. The silence is calling. And your strength is ready to be reborn. Now go. Be still. And discover what's been there all along.